Hello. Okay, so he kind of used my real name, which it's generally just V. My mom calls me Veronica. So if you come talk to me, just call me V. It's easier that way. So, like he said, some of us don't get to be left alone in a cardiologist's office anymore. I did 3 years ago when I came to Norway the first time. I don't anymore. I think it's because they Googled me. So we're very excited to come present some of the research we've been doing at Norway University College. Some might say it's a bit of an unhealthy obsession that I might have. But let's introduce ourselves. So I'm V. I'm an assistant professor. How do I get time off of work? I bring my boss with me. I am a PhD student currently, actually studying how to build robust logging for forensics and incident response on medical devices. It's a dirty job, someone's got to do it. I'm also involved with DFIR and the biohacking village and a lot of other things that don't really matter, but I'm also a cyborg. It's probably the thing that I'm the most proud about. I have my own walking, talking ecosystem.
Good afternoon. I'm Emlyn Butterfield. I'm Head of Computing for Norway University College and Program Lead for our Digital Forensics Bachelor Program. Both Veronica and I come with industry experience working with law enforcement across the globe, and really come with a passion to try and find out what evidence can we get back from any devices we look at, from the entire ecosystem, not just from a computer, not just from a mobile phone, but from absolutely anything. And that's where this kind of talk stems from, I think.
It is. I still remember the first time that I asked the question of my cardiologist, do we use pacemakers and defibrillators to determine time of death? Firstly, he looked at me strangely because I'm asking questions about determining death and asking super technical questions only to be told, no, we do liver temp, which I thought was very silly at the time because we have something connected to a person, yet we use liver temp that is accurate in a ballpark. So, what can you expect? I hate to disappoint you, we do not have the tech and the equipment that the public sector has. I'm on a budget. Emlyn doesn't want to give me lots of money, so no, we do not have the technology. The fanciest thing you're going to see is some AI-generated art.
But we would love access to all of that information and systems that were on the keynote this morning. But I think a lot of what we've done at the minute is very much not on a budget, but it's completely achievable by anyone. You'll see as we talk that actually it's specialized, but at the same time, it's not specialized.
No, so let's manage expectations right now, right? I'm not going to probably show you something that's going to blow your mind. I was as surprised as you were, but we're here to share some of our research. So what are we actually going to be talking about? If you've Googled me, seen some of my talks, you know I have a soapbox. I need one because I'm short. But there is a difference between a medical device and a clinical device. We are not talking about the desktop, laptops, equipment attached to medical devices that connects into the EHR. It's not what we're talking about today. The devices that we refer to are the ones that are classified under the EU MDR and IVDR. What is that? It's a long, boring document that manufacturers have to follow, but it does define what a medical device is. Now, some of the things we've looked at is a patient monitor. Every hospital has them. If you've ever been a patient, you've been hooked up to one. Going to look at infusion pumps, some of the devices we've actually forensically looked at, CPAP machines, pacemakers and ICDs. Buy me coffee and I'll tell you why. Cardiac programmers. Very proud I now own 3 of them. How? Well, that's my secret. But there's a whole host. Can we show you every single one? No. I'll probably take up your whole day. But we are going to try and cover some of them.
I think the key thing for me was I never thought about medical devices until Veronica came, and she'll explain why, and the kind of forensic significance that they might have, but also just the security implications from such devices and kind of the vulnerabilities that might exist and how they could be exploited. And the more you dig, the more you find, and the more you find, the more you want to dig, to the point that, as Veronica says, she owns far too many devices now, and each and every one of them has potential from both forensic and security perspectives.
I mean, by a show of hands, and I won't judge, who here has looked at medical devices in terms of vulnerabilities? I see some hands, so I'm not the only weird one. Welcome to my club.
It's the coy hands that come up that suggest that maybe we shouldn't be looking at them.
Well, we made friends with the public sector just in case I get arrested for what I have. So now we're friends. But what is medical device forensics? And yes, I had to bring in some memes because why not? Any good presentation has them. But medical devices seem like something that's foreign, sexy, new, high-tech. But it really isn't. But before I dive into the forensics of it and the incident response of it potentially and what it holds, kind of need to just do a retrospective of where we are. And the statistics here were published by the HISAC this year. So this is a study that they conducted. Now, these shouldn't surprise you. Medical devices have been vulnerable for years. It's only now that we're really talking about it. Now, 53% of these medical devices HISAC looked at and analyzed had at least one critical vulnerability which was remotely exploitable, which would impact patient care. Why is this important? Well, people like me are attached to these devices. We carry them with us. Now, if they have critical remote exploitabilities, well, it becomes a little bit different when someone's standing in front of you with those devices. Because there are many people just like me that potentially are walking around with a vulnerable device. Caveat, that doesn't mean I'm not going to have my device. I will rather have it than not have it.
But I think a big thing about these is that nobody's really considered the technology before. So vulnerabilities seem to have increased. I think we've discussed this many times. They seem to have increased, and there seems to be more security vulnerabilities now. But in all honesty, a lot of this is because nobody's checked them before and considered them as anything that needs to be tested, anything that needs to be secure. It was a medical device that gave support to different people in different ways. But now, when people start looking at the opportunities that they allow, then you can start seeing where are the holes, what can we do, how can we exploit them?
I mean, the vulnerabilities that have been found and disclosed in the recent years has increased by 59%. Now, that might seem like an alarming thing. To me, it's exciting, but because it means more people are doing what? They're looking at devices. I am always in support of knowing what the vulnerability is so that I can fix it, right? Better you know what's broken than know what is, than not know. Now, in a general healthcare delivery organization, one of the devices used most is an infusion pump, right? They're almost in every room. So 38% of the hospital networks are generally made up of infusion pumps. Now, anyone here know what an infusion pump is? Right? They deliver some serious drugs like morphine or pain medication. So generally, they are things we don't want to be remotely exploitable. Now, 73% of the infusion pumps on the market have at least one remotely exploitable vulnerability. So you can kind of see that there are lots of reasons why we should be looking at these devices. I told you I'm going to have some amazing art. AI is fantastic. So what are some of the vulnerabilities? Well, these shouldn't shock you too much. These are things we've been dealing with in hardware manufacturing for years, right? We have 64% that is built into the software. But lucky for us, if it's in software, what can we do? We can fix them if we know about them. Now, medical devices, some might say legacy will always be a problem, and there is a reason, a real reason for it. We're dealing with hardware components. Hardware components within a human being's body. So how do you deal with a hardware vulnerability that's baked into a device? You're going to call in the patient and say, hey, we're going to cut you open because we need your device, even though it's a functioning medical device? No. There was a big recall on cardiac implants and pacemakers a few years back because a big vulnerability dropped. And because of a knee-jerk reaction from the manufacturer, they started patching without doing a real analysis and ended up bricking patients' devices. Security doesn't always get it right, because we did patch happiness. Ended up in patients having to come in and have physical surgeries, right? Thank goodness it's not rechargeable by means of that the patient has to recharge the device, because some of us would die. But you have to go in because it's a whole unit. So again, just finding a vulnerability is one component. Fixing it when it's hardware is much harder. But lucky for us, there is hardware vulnerabilities, and we'll tell you why it's a good thing sometimes. Now, there are different classes of medical devices. So who here has a health watch, like Apple? It's considered a medical device because it gives medical algorithms, specifically the cardiac one that does atrial fibrillation. Now, in those specific class 3 devices, there was vulnerabilities found. But I think the more concerning ones is the classes of devices within people's bodies, or attached to people's bodies, or on hospital networks.
You can see we practice this really well.
We don't, ever.
So what we need to think about is why are these vulnerabilities important? I mean, it looks sexy from a security perspective, saying that there's vulnerabilities in systems embedded in people's devices that are embedded inside their bodies. But from a forensic perspective, which is kind of a big part of where we're coming from, is these vulnerabilities allow evidence to be collected, but also because they can be exploited, maybe those devices hold the forensic evidence that maybe prove, and this is maybe Hollywood style, but prove how somebody died. Maybe somebody hacked into the pacemaker and managed to overpower the pacemaker and blow them up, whatever it might be. But maybe that evidence exists somewhere. Can we capture that evidence? Is it obtainable?
You've really gone Homeland there on us. So who here has seen the Homeland episode called Unbreak My Heart, I think it is what it was called, where they have a patient monitor in the president's room, you know, and they managed to find his serial number and did this whole sophisticated hack. That hack is not as unplausible as one might think, right? So anyone that does medical device security will tell you that that day people's heads were on fire. But no one considers DFIR. No one considers that these devices that are on a hospital network might be the foothold onto your electronic healthcare records. We know cybercrime is motivated by what? Monetary gain. How do we get more money? We sell data. Now, electronic healthcare records is one of those things that's very lucrative for cybercriminals to sell. And these devices are medical devices. They're functionally built not to be secure, but to give treatment and record clinical data. Therefore, they're actually a rich treasure trove for cybercriminals.
Now, the challenge we have is, where do you get the devices from? You can get dead bodies and drag them into your office and chop them up and pull out what you need. You can potentially go and source devices from different places and hope that they have information and hope they have weaknesses that you can try and exploit.
So in South Africa, it was fairly easy. I had a friend at a coroner, and by law, they have to remove the pacemakers and ICDs because they go boom in the incinerator. So have a friend, call a friend is helpful, otherwise your old friend eBay. Shockingly enough, very easy to obtain devices now. I think I've got the algorithm down to sit and wait. Now, I am not saying do as I do. In fact, I'm saying don't do as I do at home, right? That's the disclaimer. But most of our devices are sourced currently, since moving to Norway, from eBay. And one might think that you don't get devices from there, but you do. I don't know if they fell off a truck. Don't care. I just want to be able to hack into them, do some forensics, and take it from there.
Now, you'd think forensics on medical devices. If you've never performed forensics, it might sound a little bit fantastical, if that's a word, potentially. But in terms of medical devices, can we use the same techniques? Do we have to advance techniques? Do we have to use the fancy things that we saw in a keynote this morning? Well, the answer is kind of no. Realistically, what we're looking at is normal technology. Normal being technology that's been around for a long time. It's just maybe used in a different way, and therefore we can extract the same data from them as we do from computers, mobile phones, applications, whatever it might be, and still get all that data back and make use of it. We can use old techniques just in a new way.
I think that was probably one of the most disillusioned I was when I looked at pacemaker data the first time, because it looks sleek. It looks like it's got some new technology because it uses machine learning. It is able to keep my heart beating. It's able to keep me upright. All that amazing things. And then you open it to come to disappointment that it just looks like a micro PC, like microcomputer with some components. And it's not as fancy as you think it is. But it's important understanding what's under the hood, because people are intimidated by doing work on medical devices. And that's the purpose of this talk, is to kind of demystify these devices and say that it's actually accessible and easy. Well, not easy, but it is doable.
But don't tell everyone, otherwise we won't be able to get funding for future research.
Okay, so because we're academics and in forensic sciences, we have to come up with a process that kind of sort of follows a pattern that's repeatable, reproducible, and that we can document. So there's three things that with every device that we've looked at that we've kind of had to use. We've had to upskill to be able to do some medical engineering, or just normal engineering, but having to look at the device to figure out, is it still working as it should? There's no use doing forensics on a device if the data you're generating is coming from a flawed device. It doesn't help us document what's on the devices. But it serves another purpose. It helps us reverse engineer the hardware to potentially understand how we can interact with it. Because obviously there's many vulnerabilities on these devices that can be exploited. However, we need to find the door in, as was said this morning, jump the fence, that would leave the least amount of breadcrumbs behind, because it is forensics.
Then we get into the forensic side. How do we extract that information so that we can make use of it and present it and analyze it and use that in wherever we're going in the future? Now, you've got to think these medical devices are implanted, they're embedded. If somebody dies because something's happened on their medical device, then that's a criminal case, and therefore we have to do things properly because it's going to go into the courts later on. So we have to consider, just as we did on the keynote this morning, all the different steps of the forensic process. How do we extract? How do we analyze? And how do we do it in such a way that it's repeatable? Now, medical devices offer an additional challenge of it's not always repeatable. Sometimes we have to really destroy the device, and we've seen destroyed devices to be able to get the data back, and somebody else won't be able to replicate that later. That is just a challenge that we have to deal with in the future.
But I think it's a challenge that IoT sometimes faces as well, is that by means of actually getting into the device, we end up destroying it. We void warranties. I have realized now that every device I have opened, there's no way it will ever be used as a medical device again. It's labeled for non-human use. Because why? I'm not certified to open them up. If I was certified to open them up and I could do it in a process that retains the integrity of the device, that's different. But that certification will have to be done for every manufacturer, every device, which, as you can see, for digital forensics won't be a real achievable. I mean, I'd love to, but some manufacturers are nicer than others and will play ball, and some just generally don't. But the final one is probably, how do we visualize the data, right? Because it's medical data. It's not data as we know. So unfortunately, we can't use our nice commercial forensic tools. They don't know what to do with the data because it is in unique formats. And better yet, they come in different shapes and forms. No medical device is exactly the same. There is a pattern, but they are different. So it's coming into creative ways of either building your own visualizations, or using clinical open source software to visualize data to reconstruct what that data is.
I think this is one of those, it's a team player thing, because not everybody will understand how to get the data from the device, how to connect to it, how to get it on a low level, so that we can perform the forensics, and then in particular, understanding the clinical side of things. I mean, some of that data, I think you need to study a long time as a doctor to understand parts of it, and to make sense of it. So sometimes we'll have to pull in other people to assist.
But I think the important thing is forensics people know how to work with data, right? There's lots of instances of data that we don't understand what the data means, but we can take it, visualize to someone, like a medical examiner, that can then look at the data in a format that they're used to. So I get asked this question regularly. Why are you so weird that you want to do your research? Well, I have a device. I'm curious about it, because if someone's going to get killed, it's going to be me. Right? No, I'm joking. But it is the connection from the cyber world to the real world. So it matters because people's lives matter, and it's only a matter of time before we see this exploited in the wild. So let's look at a device. Let's look at our first device, which is an implanted cardiac device. What this purpose of this device is, it'll kick you in the chest and wake you up when your heart decides to misbehave, in short. Okay, that is what's in my body. Well, an upgraded version. I'm obviously not going to show you guys what my device looks like. Like I said, a room full of hackers. No, 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 I know better. Well, sure. I'm happy to be the ethical, what do you call it, research bunny that you can try and attack my device. I might even tell you how. No, I won't. So what does forensics look like on an implant, right? We know DD, we know RAW, we know EO1, we know all those kind of forensic images. Hate to disappoint you, that's not what you're going to get. So depending on the manufacturer, so this is not applicable to every single implant because every manufacturer has their own way of doing it. A lot of them has a, what we call a PCB file, the programmable database file. That contains all the information. Most of this information currently is clinical. So how many times was treatment given? The firmware is on there. So it is not in the traditional format that you would expect it to be. It's in a proprietary binary format. Currently, the easiest forensic way to get a full capture of that without having to destroy the device or take it outside a human body is to use a cardiac programmer. They have the ability to actually grab that full binary image. But then you're kind of stuck because it's a proprietary binary format. Now you have to engage with the manufacturer. And that goes right about 50% of the time. So it's either a maybe or a not. European manufacturers tend to play ball nicely. The US lot is a little bit of a different kettle of fish. But this PDB file is super important because it tells us whether the patient received specific treatment. It tells us what the settings are and when last it's been changed. But that's basically the extent of an implant.
I think with medical devices, if you've ever done phone forensics, and we're talking Nokia 1100s, Samsung D500s, that kind of age of device, we're probably at that same stage now where there's lots of different variety of formats. Each and every one of them essentially needs decoding in some way. So if you love hex, then this kind of stuff is perfect for you because you can pull it apart and find out all the evidence that's inside of it, and not many people can currently.
Yeah, but before we move on, so you've seen the device that's a cardiac implant. You get similar devices like that that goes for deep brain stimulation. They are not quite the same as a cardiac implant. There's one key difference. The brain stimulators actually are rechargeable, which means they aren't restrained to the amount of storage they have. So some of them might actually have a file system or an OS on them, where the cardiac ones are reliant on X amount of CPU cycles, so they can only do certain amount of data storage, for a certain amount of time with some security, sadly, because we don't want to have a new device every 3 years. I like going in it once in 17 years, but that's how long this device lasts. This is an interesting story. So this device is my dad's device. He asks himself the question what he did to deserve me as a daughter, but we've built a whole scenario around a patient dying using his data. Now, he kindly gave me the device after I was done with it. I just think he didn't trust what was done on the device, so he didn't think that it would work anymore. But the CPAP machine, you would think, is less foreign than an implant, right? Lots of people have CPAP machines. So basic tools that we needed was a specific torque screw, which is one of the things you find that you need. And then, depending on some hardware, to be able to do some hardware acquisitions.
Now, the disappointing or exciting, depending on how you look at it, the data's on an SD card. It's on an SD card using a standard file system that we know how to analyze, we know how to extract. It's nothing new, it's disappointingly nothing sexy. However, it is easy to get hold of. We can use traditional forensic tools and techniques to extract the data, to analyze it, to interpret it, and do some parsing of the information.
Yeah, I think the shocking part was that the claim is made within the FDA documentation as well as the manual that they offer secure delete. Now, if you're living in the EU, you know the right to be deleted, the right to be forgotten, GDPR, and data limitation. So I decided, well, in all things in science, let's see if we can get some more SD cards on eBay and see if we can do good old-fashioned data recovery. Now, the findings on that study, or, well, I say study, a little project that we had, we found that it was not secure delete, but just a basic formatting that was being done. So if you know the FAT file system, you know data recovery can be fairly simple. So again, we were able to actually recover patient data from previous patients that sold the cards. Now, the machine itself, depending on the version you have, may contain a Linux file system. Good thing about this, it is encrypted both at rest and in transit. But for the sake of not totally destroying the device, we didn't want to go take the board apart. But then Emlyn lost them because he took his eye off his luggage in Germany. So the device is somewhere on eBay for sale.
But it wasn't just my device, it was all my clothes and everything. But that's a different story. As soon as you touch this device, as soon as you start opening up, you void the warranty, which means it's no longer usable for and fit for human, I was going to say consumption, use. And that's a challenge in itself. I mean, the SD card holds information that's really of interest, that patient data, the recoverable information. That's perfect. But to get to it, we're now voiding the warranty, which kind of brings us back again to the early days of phones and extracting that kind of data.
Yeah, so in terms of we can destroy devices, I mean, I can open them up and void them completely. But in a real-life digital forensic situation, are we in the business of taking devices that are potentially super expensive, like MRIs, off the market because we've now done forensics on them? No, I don't think anyone's going to be happy with us, at least the hospitals won't be, because those are machines that they replace once in a while. So the key thing to this research is, can we get in without compromising the integrity of the device itself? Now, in terms of this one, we had a spare one that we wanted to destroy and open, and we found that it had the ability to connect to the board itself, which a lot of these devices have. Now, security professionals will go, why did they do something like that? Well, because diagnostics has to happen, debugging has to be happening, and technicians need to be able to debug and figure out if a device is working as it should. Now, that means once you've got physical access to devices, that becomes super easy to get into them, because we know potentially this is a component of the design. So a lot of the times, this is just to give you an idea, we have to face many decisions, like how are we going to go in, which way is going to be least destructive, which way is going to yield the evidence or the information we want to have. I wish I had the answer to say to you, it's X, but the forensic answer is, it depends on the device.
But if we can be lazy, we'll be lazy. And so we'll just look at the SD card. And from that, we'll pull out a variety of different information that gives us everything about the machine, its settings, its patient data, structures of treatments that have taken place, which includes...
So when we opened the device, we found an EDF format. Now, EDF format is a format that's been around for as long as I have, and there I've just given away my birth year. But it has been around for ages. And you find well-documented things in sleep studies, because what is the CPAP machine doing? It is monitoring your sleeping pattern as well as your breathing. So in applied data science, because there's a lot of studies done, we could find a documented structure, and it is in ASCII. So it's totally human readable and in plain text. So you can imagine on those SD cards that we recovered the data, we could actually do a trend analysis on who the patient is, how they slept, what therapies they get, what device it came from, and all these very nice pieces of information. Now, forensically, these things are important because we can determine whether anyone has tampered with data, but we can also determine whether or not a patient received the equal clinical therapy that the setting says it should receive. So if someone's changed the settings, there is indications that it's happened, so we'll be able to say that a patient did not receive appropriate care. Again, I'm lazy, Emlyn's lazy, so if we can find code to do what we need to do, we will. Again, went to the applied data science space and found some nice Python libraries that pass this information out and gives it to us because we like to do things easy. But why reinvent the wheel? So using MATLAB, if you really want to, you can actually put out the signal, the medical signals, and determine the sleep patterns. Or you find open source software that does it for you. Now, in the CPAP community, when you do a little bit of OSINT and research, you actually find that patients got fed up with the care and the denial of access to their data, that someone built a tool that parses the information so that you can make informed decisions, right? And this has been maintained and is freely available and can be used to actually visualize the data. Now, our students at North University College actually does medical device forensics, and this is from a scenario that I built around tricking my dad's machine to not sense his breathing, so I could simulate him dying and put him under a tarp and take photos. But we are able to say what is the settings and the fact that the machine didn't respond when he had an event. Insulin pumps are the same. There's a huge underground community of patients that have built software that allows you to read data off an insulin pump.
So essentially, it uses the FAT file system. It's on an SD card. Even if things are securely deleted, it's all perfectly recoverable, and we can find information about past patients and all the information that was stored on there about their treatments, the kind of system that was used, and also their PII. So information that's very specific to them. You need specialist knowledge, I think, to be able to parse that information. This stuff, it means nothing to me. Veronica spent a lot of time looking at this, but it's just about sleep patterns. But the medical experts will understand this and have more perspective on it.
Yeah, I might be the weird exception to the rule. I want to understand how these things work. I necessarily won't go testify in court. Just to what Emlyn's referring to is knowing where your line is. I did consult on a case involving a pacemaker where in a murder case, short story, because I can't give you the long one, is the fact that I was able to verify date and time on the device. I was able to verify the integrity of the report that was taken. But I was not allowed, even though I'm a patient since 19 and I understand these things at heart, testify to what it meant, whether the patient receives the appropriate therapy. A medical specialist was brought in, but because we could confirm the integrity of the data, it made his job a lot easier. This was probably the most fun I had because I went totally old school. It's a device I've never come into contact with in South Africa. It's a patient monitor network bridge. So it bridges into the hospital network and connects to other devices, because what can go wrong? One would assume that because it's a network bridge that it is fairly secure. Now, if you look here, we can see that it's running Tordidex kind of gives it away. So we know one avenue to go research, but we also know that they've got some proprietary software on there.
I think this fits nicely back with the CPAP machine in that there's a hell of a lot of information out there that you can find just by Googling. Everything from people that have decided to pull apart the system before, to look at the file data, to understand and interpret that information and build tools that will parse that information, to people that just want to share, people like Veronica who just want to share information out there about what the device does, what it's capable of, and what it's made up of. So this is where your Googling should really be the starting point for a lot of these kind of research purposes.
So I bought this device because it was a late night shopping. I tend to do that half asleep, and then, surprise, more packages. My husband's not impressed because he's just another one. I'm like, don't ask questions. First thing I did was I did a good old-fashioned Google. I go to the manual. Now, one might expect these manuals aren't readily available. Midwench is your friend. Every technician and nurse practitioner puts these manuals on that they've scanned from their hospitals, because what happens to manuals? They get lost. Right, so sharing is caring in the medical world. And those things contain a heck of a load of information. It's actually overwhelming. The FDA publishes some of the documentation. EU MDR does as well. So if you read around the redacted black areas of things that's proprietary and confidential, you can get a gist of what is going on this device. Now, once we did the research and I identified which board it was, it gives me access to a lot. I found some known vulnerabilities. Now, everyone should be, or perhaps isn't, with this Spectrum meltdown attacks. Now, this is on a hardware board, so this means that it's not something that can easily be mitigated. Now, 2 out of the 3 CVEs, this board was impacted. Why do we care about this in forensics? Like I said this morning, it is our hold into a device. It's the hole that we need to climb through. Now, this is just one example. Most of these devices, when you start looking into the boards, you will find a whole host of vulnerabilities on them.
And I think this kind of research is where the fields of forensics and security really cross over. So looking for vulnerabilities, exploiting vulnerabilities, was not necessarily something that was ever in forensics, but is really important to get into these new systems and new devices, which is why the community needs to grow and expand and share information about how to break into these systems, how to then attack and steal the information, not only from the perspective of someone exploiting it for nefarious purposes, but also for legitimate legal purposes.
So just to be clear, so one of the things, I belong to the biohacking village in Vegas, and I am the cavalry, which does a lot of this research. Ethically, by the code of conduct that we have, when we find exploited vulnerabilities that haven't been reported on, we will report it responsibly to the manufacturers. Now, that might not sound as fun, but because we are dealing with human beings and potential things that can impact harm, we do tend to report these as we find them, and work with the manufacturers on fixing them. So we are very much for responsible disclosure. None of these that we are showing today or the methods are undocumented. These are well-documented things that others have found in these devices. So in terms of this device, it soon became apparent that perhaps we weren't going to be able to use our forensic tools. I was very shocked to find a bunch of USB ports at the back and decided, well, what's going to happen if I put a USB mouse and keyboard in? Am I going to be able to break out of the kiosk? If you've ever tried to break into kiosks or get them to go, sticky keys is normally your friend. In this instance, it was literally pressing the Windows button and poof, there's Windows saying, hi, I'm here. What can I do for you? But then, doing more research, I realized that this was a version of Windows I haven't seen before, because it is embedded Windows. Who here has ever done PDA forensics? That's how old school it is. So it is, I think, Windows CE 5 on this specific one. But the developer guides gave us a lot of information on potentially how we could connect to this device. As you can see, we've got Ethernet, USB that we already saw without opening the device, GPIO, UART, L2C, and it had an SD card. They tried to hide it under the board, but it was quite apparent that there was something there. So kudos for trying. this thing was very perplexing because even when I did the forensic acquisition of the SD card, it soon became apparent that it doesn't have a C drive, it doesn't have a root drive, it's not the traditional embedded Windows that I knew. So I did some more research on the developer tools and realized there's a whole host of tools that offer me access into the device. Why? Because developers need access to program these boards and work with them. So what did we do? We used the remote viewer, right? It's not very sexy. What it does, it takes connection from your PC to the device and allows you to use your computer as a screen. But it gives you access to the operating system, which allows you to do a whole lot more. And I didn't need a password at all. It was literally just identifying the IP address of the device and then connecting these two pieces of software up. Now, we did the acquisition traditionally. I'm not going to tell you for the SD card how we did the acquisition. That's boring. But we used the update tool. Now, this specific board has a tool that allows you to do a cold boot, a warm boot, or actually save binary images of the data contained. So the operating system, the file system, the bootloader, and all of those there. Now, this is probably the closest we're going to get without having to rip the board apart. So this is what we did. It's a binary image, right? It should be readable. Sad was my realization that it wasn't, because it was also an operating file system that I've never encountered. Who here has encountered TFAT? Yeah, I didn't either until that time. So everything was a proprietary binary format that was not in any ways or means viewable. But reading a little bit more, I was able to build the same Visual Basic environment and use open source code to translate the binary images into file system files.
This gives your logical files, and we can then use our standard forensic tools to do the analysis. Same things were found on the SD card, maybe slightly simpler to get hold of the SD card data, but the information is there, and we can do standard analysis, pull the information out. We can find things inside of the registry, because it uses embedded Windows. The registry is there, giving us things like typed URLs, information about systems, applications that have been run also.
So one of the things, once we had that, and we had both images, we could compare with fuzzy hashing and hash values to confirm that what we're seeing on the SD card is in fact a backup and not older data, so that we can verify it. But this acquisition was done without ever opening up the device. Now, one might think Windows registry, they all feel and look the same. Embedded Windows are slightly different. It's a compact version. So your registry editor that you're using now won't work. And as such, we needed to make use of an older version of registry editor to actually look at the data. So these are the core findings from the Windows registry that we were able to recover. While some of them are useful, there's not a lot, but this is because it's a resource-constrained device. We have the machine GUID or identifier, so we can identify each machine uniquely. We had limited USB information, like 3 or 4 entries, and not to the extent that you can get today. Typed URLs were also first in, first out, so not a lot noted. Again, resource-constrained devices.
Again, traditional forensic techniques can be used. It's nothing new. It's just used slightly differently. This information was easily extractable, I think it's fair to say. It was well documented. There was information all over the web that you could search for to find, and that seems to be the case for a lot of the medical devices. And making use of that open source intelligence in the first place gives you a lot of access to the information that's in the back end.
And again, the fact is that secure delete is not, as we would know it in forensics, it is sometimes just a factory reset or clearing out of the root directory. It's not really anything comprehensive, so general data recovery would work. How are we looking on time?
You can leave some time for questions if you like.
Okay, well, we're going to finish up and then we will take some time. Okay, so future research. We've got a heck of a lot of equipment that's just come in that we need to look at. I love the fact that I'm paid to actually look at medical equipment. It's amazing. It's probably an unhealthy obsession, but we have more devices that needs to be examined. Up until the point that I get banned from eBay, that is where I will source my devices, and then I'll find alternate routes. But the acquisition process is fairly still hardware-based, right? It does leave some destructive elements. And it is going to be that way because of how the devices are manufactured and the fact that these things last 10 plus years. The newer devices are actually, according to the FDA cybersecurity guidance, now having to come with the ability to be forensically acquired. That's going to probably be another 5 years before we see those things in market, so the future is bright, and we will see more capabilities to do that.
But what we see is a range of different operating systems and a larger ecosystem. So whilst we're talking about physical devices now, what we also need to think about is the applications that connect to those devices. Are they on Android? Are they on iOS? We can then again use more traditional forensic techniques to extract that data, and it is so rich. It's terrifying, I think, about how easy it is to gather that information and make use of it.
Once you have access to the physical device, the operating system is your friend. It will give you all the information. And a lot of the time, the manufacturers don't understand the underlying operating system or even the file system, because the rules of how data is stored and deleted is handled by the file system, and the operating system plays a role in that. So whilst they build applications on top of these layers, the rules still apply from the file system to the operating system. But it might be shocking to know that my cardiac patient monitor is running on Android, and it's got an ext file system. It's things in forensics we know. So it's nothing new, it's nothing strange. But I think the key finding is we need more people to do research into this, right? We need that task team to take on board and actually consider medical devices as a problem. Now, we have to acknowledge that medical devices does not have a functional requirement for forensics and security. By virtue of this, they're not ever going to be massively pushed to be secure. I got asked the question, V, would you ever want a username and password on your implant? And the answer is no. Why? Because when I'm having a cardiac issue, I don't have time to give a username and password to the nurses and doctors. I want them to have access immediately. So, availability of devices cannot be overtaken by security.
But these devices will never be the linchpin within an investigation. They will be something that adds information, that maybe gives a timeline or a suggestive intelligence that we can then use and correlate with other information. So we're not suggesting that these are going to be the golden bullet, but they will assist, and they are a different source of information that is generally overlooked at the moment.
It's more a circumstantial evidence. It adds to the case. And the same with the implants that have been used in court cases. They're not the determining factor. They're simply in support of other evidence. Now, how do you get started in this? A lot of OSINT. You research, right? If you can Google, you can find a manual. You might even find it on the manufacturer's website where it asks you, are you a doctor? And if you lie good enough and you just say yes and you lie from your location, a lot of these manufacturers give you the technical manual, the operator's manual, and the clinical manual. What more do you need to understand what the device is doing without ever opening it?
The caveat there is do not lie. Veronica is just suggesting one way of gathering information, and she is not encouraging people to lie on applications.
I think the biggest thing that I've learned from these things, and that this was kind of the inspiration for my PhD, is the logs suck on these devices. They absolutely don't contain any robust logging of any means or form. The logs are riddled with vulnerabilities. We saw lots of things where sensitive data has been disclosed. Let me tell you, every medical device, as I stand here before you today, contains logs with printed plaintext JWT tokens, exposed URLs, app keys and secrets, patient data, because they are built with clinicians in mind and they're built with debugging in mind, not for the purposes of security or incident response. And with that, you are rid of us, unless you have any more questions.
Thank you, Emlyn. And V. I see a hand at the back. Yes.
Thank you very much for the talk. Very interesting. Was wondering if there's any personal health medical device with a wireless module, say Bluetooth, that you managed to find a fully remote exploit to, because that's the sexiest part, right?
So I have a unique take on vulnerabilities. I'm going to stand like this because I can't see you. One of the things is, yeah, we found Bluetooth attacks, we found wireless attacks. Heaven knows my device has got what they refer to as telemetry C, which is wireless, which communicates in plain text. I have RF as a backup, and I have Bluetooth, right? All of these modules will become vulnerable at some point. That is the sexy part of it, but I think where I get excited is, can I tell what I've done to compromise the device? Is it, I find a vulnerability, I exploit the vulnerability, but then I want to do the forensics on it to determine whether or not there's logs, there's artifacts. I only have to get in once. But to fix things and make things more secure and do forensics is a bit of a continuous challenge. And that's kind of where I enjoy doing what I do. But if we find vulnerabilities, we do responsibly disclose it, and we do disclose mechanisms in what we find for forensics. Like if I find no access to logs that I've connected onto, that is something that we will tell the manufacturer and suggest that they add in future releases, if possible.
Any other?
Early days with this. So the more devices that we look at and the more research that we do, we will come across the sexier devices, but we're going maybe simpler to start with, just to prove what can be done, and then we can go forward from there.
So some of the devices I do have, I legally cannot yet publicly disclose some of the vulnerabilities due to the fact of the manufacturer and working with them to fix it, because I'm under contract. So whilst I'd love to be able to do these demos, legally I don't, and I am a visitor in this country. So keep watching the space. When that time runs out on when we can publish, we will publish.
Hi. So what I was left wondering is, speaking of the cardiac programmers, you said you can basically dump the data from a device. Can you do that covertly, or do you have to be in such a close proximity that basically you can't just sniff everyone's data around the room?
So I'm going to tell you why I'm not allowed into a hospital room alone anymore. In South Africa, we managed to do a man-in-the-middle attack with exactly that by, just sniffing the authentication between programmer and patient. The doctor didn't assume anything else of me because they don't think that it's something to be worried about. The old telemetry that most of these devices have as a backup is in plain text, right? So if you at the appropriate time is able to sniff the traffic, you get the golden authentication token. That means that every device that has, from that manufacturer, you could do a replay attack. There is actually well-documented research on that from other manufacturers. I can't say their name because I'm going to get into trouble again, but there has been a mass recall and things like that. I remember attending Black Hat where a friend of mine, Billy Rios, was doing an attack with a programmer that they were able to put malware on. Because a lot of these cardiac programmers run a Windows variant.
Well, to answer your question, the close proximity is still required, generally speaking.
Actually, not that close anymore.
Not now.
But then yes. The range, I think, is 50 meters now, and increasing ever so often as technology increases. But we do call them the stars have to align attack, right? It's not just that has to align, it's a bunch of other elements which makes these attacks still unlikely. It's more likely that my device accidentally goes into what is referred to as VVI mode, which it thinks it's being debugged, and it's constantly going to go. We have a lab on campus that interferes with my device and actually puts it into VVI mode because of the electric interference, which means it could potentially drain the battery. There's other attacks of magnets being used to put it into debug mode. But like I said, they find something, they improve upon it in the next generation. But if you have a medical device, it's going to be vulnerable, if not now, in 2 years when someone has got nothing better to do and they found a vulnerability. It's a thing we need to become comfortable with.
Time for one more question. Anybody? I have one question, more on the forensics in general. Tool validation has been a big thing in some jurisdictions on the admissibility of forensic evidence. So, yeah, of course, in decades gone by, NCASE, FTK were the big two in North America anyway. Is tool validation a problem when you're talking about gathering evidence with various open source tools and developer kits and so on?
I think if you can show that it is reproducible, repeatable, and that you've tested it numerous times, then it becomes easier to be admissible in court. It is not your traditional forensics, right? Whilst the analysis is, the acquisition can and will be disputed in court. This case that I consulted on, in fact, the manufacturer picked up the device, dumped the data, and destroyed it because it's biohazard, right? But in any investigation, we would never destroy a device that we're looking at. But that was their process, and it was approved, and the courts accepted it as such. So it's still developing. We're still making lots of mistakes, and the more it gets tested in court, the more we will be able to refine the processes. But a lot of these things probably won't pass the test for going to court yet, if I'm honest with you.